Okay, everyone, I'll give it a couple more minutes just because we're in a different location, so I was expecting the room a little bit fuller. Some people might be lost. Launceston working out how to join with streaming on their end and might not get it working straight away. So if you don't mind, I'll just take a couple of minutes before we start. But welcome to week 2. Keep talking now. This isn't my final form. What? I don't even know what that is, but probably.
You said the quote and you don't know what it is. At least Google.
I know the quote, but I don't know anything about it, so...
Do you know what the show is?
Oh yeah, vaguely. Don't ask me to explain that.
What name is the show?
Okay, Launceston tells me that they can see this on their live stream at their end. So the reason I waited just a little bit of time there is that we're not doing a regular video conference here where Launceston can hear us and speak from above on the speakers. They are unfortunately sitting in a room in Launceston somewhere with a live stream of this lecture going on their local presentation. Just because this room isn't capable of video conferencing to them, apparently. We'll see if we'll continue using this room, so please keep looking at your emails for updates, because it looks like there's enough people that we could go back to the other room at this rate. Okay, so let's start off with a recap of week 1. Seems about right. I'm making light of the situation here, but in all seriousness, I do apologise on behalf of UTAS for there not being anyone to show up to your lecture in week 1. No one could have predicted that, I suppose the lecturer who didn't show up could have predicted it. For the record, that's not me, and so as a result of this craziness, I have been given this unit, thrust upon me somewhat this unit. As of Friday, so you will need to bear with me just a little bit about where we're at with the unit. Over the last couple of days, I've tried my best to work out what the assessment tasks are and write them for this year because they weren't written, so you didn't have assessment tasks, there wasn't a theme to your assignments. You now have one. I haven't posted that because it's all still a little bit tentative, but expect some progress in the next week or so. Yeah, so again, I do apologise, but it's almost pretty funny. What is also funny about this GIF is that guy's name is Troy, and what happened in Launceston is our Launceston tutor, Troy, showed up and tried to help people, did his best, tried to video conference to you guys. I don't think he was successful in doing so, no. So there's a little bit of context to this GIF that also poor Troy in Launceston had to deal with this. Not his fault either. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty regular week 1 lecture delivered in week 2. I will try and get into some content. We won't be catching up on content this week. I'm not that good. But throughout semester, I will try and catch up to the original schedule. So what that might mean is that there might be an extra lecture, or, more preferable for me, is that one of your tutorials will be, you'll be given lecture content by your tutor. That's because the tutorials in this unit are fairly open, and there's quite a few tutorials that are just related to working on your assignment, so we can replace one of those with some extra content without needing to deal with crazy scheduling issues. But don't expect too much of a catch-up today. I'll do my best. So who am I? For people who haven't seen me before, I'm Lindsay. I am a PhD candidate, which means that I haven't got my PhD yet. However, I have submitted my thesis. I'm waiting for that anxiously. There's some people just coming in, for people on the stream who are unsure what all this noise is. expected latecomers, because who knows where on earth we are at UTAS right now. So for those of you who showed up late, you didn't miss much. Just a mildly funny GIF. So, yeah, in terms of who I am, sorry guys who just showed up, I can hear you all talking. I'm able to hear you very well. That means the people around you can hear you, which means they can't hear me, which is a great shame, because everyone wants to hear me. So in terms of what my background is and what I might bring to this unit is I am in the games space. I'm the lead gameplay programmer for Giant Margarita. Worked on a couple of games with them, with Ian Lewis. You would have probably heard of him. And so overall, I'm much more technically oriented than what this unit might require of a lecturer. But I am still very interested in this field. So hopefully I'll bring a somewhat different perspective to this unit than what Christopher Lug did from his perspective. Maybe I will decide that it is better to deliver content that's aligned with how I see the area. So where content didn't exist, I might bring in some content that is games related, as gamification and serious games are very much related to HCI. And that's my area, that's what I did my PhD on. So maybe we'll get some game-related stuff. I nearly went as far as making your assignment be about games, but stopped short of that because realising that that won't be everyone's cup of tea. The bit you actually care about who I am is my contact details, no doubt. So I'm on level 4, next to Joel and Sunja. That's my email, that's my phone number, which I sometimes answer. Consultation hours, I have an 11 o'clock consultation on Mondays. That one's by appointment just because my timetable is a bit full up on Mondays and other days with other meetings. So I need to know in advance that you're coming and then I can arrange my day. But on Monday at 3 o'clock, there is no appointment necessary. You can just show up. Cool. We have some other wonderful tutoring staff. And given the situation that we're in, we should rely on them also and their amazing knowledge, particularly Meredith, because she was involved with actually creating this unit in the past. So if you're after someone who knows the area very well, at least in terms of what we're trying to deliver in these slides, Meredith is amazing for that. Adam also has taken this class as a student and is a wonderful tutor. He is also from a games background, so his thinking might align with mine in some ways, but he's a great thinker. We have Troy up in Launceston. I don't have an email address for him, sorry about that. Consultation times, they will tell you. Still got people rolling on in at 10 o'clock, 10 past I should say. An interesting one then, you might have seen an announcement about this on Milo. What I have done to enable communication mainly for our wonderful Launceston students is set up a unit Discord. So a Discord is effectively the gaming version of Slack. Who's heard of Slack? Yep, who's heard of Discord? More people. Interesting. It's basically a chat room with many channels. You guys in Hobart probably won't need to use that because your way of communicating with me is to literally yell out because I can hear you. I can hear you when you're whispering. I'll definitely hear you when you yell out. And I encourage that in this unit, that we will be having a bit of discourse about some of the stuff we're discussing. Because, as we'll discover, this unit is very much a not right or wrong answer kind of unit. It's more of a let's discuss why we think something's right or why we think something's wrong, or discuss the properties of something. And the best way to do that is to discuss as humans together rather than me just putting across my point of view. I don't really think that much of my point of view. I don't think it's that interesting. I'm more interested to hear what you guys have to say. But for you guys, it's going to be easier in Hobart to talk to me. Launceston, I have on my laptop next to me the Discord open to the lecture chat channel where you can instant message me and I will do my best to keep an eye on that. This is my test here that you should say something on here right now to test that I'm seeing it. I haven't written anything yet. there could be a delay. Let's spend 5 minutes watching the chat. Yeah, sick of that. But there we go, Tim is typing. So Tim from Launceston, no doubt he's working from home and not with the other Launceston students. But it is a great way to get some communication where there otherwise would be none. You can use that for general chat, but really if you need anything from me, email still. I am pretty good at replying to emails. I have no idea how I'll go with Discord. Okay. The unit outline. Somewhat ironic that there's red text on this slide saying that it's very important and that it's unchangeable, set in stone, given that we might have to move some things around in this unit to make up for the first week. I haven't got any plans to actually move any assessment deadlines yet, and the assessment is staying the same. But if I deem it necessary that I don't think you'll be able to complete your assignments, I should be able to work that out and change assignment deadlines. That can also come from feedback from you guys, but it'll only get better. I can only push them back. Have a look at the unit outline when you can. I'll go through some of the details here. So the unit changed last year and won't be changing this year other than what I can do on the fly due to some evaluate feedback. This happens every year. Some feedback from students was that the content was too up in the air and not aligned with any kind of textbook. There is somewhat of a textbook, or at least a set of slides with a textbook that I will be trying to stick to as best I can in terms of providing a structure for the unit. And so that is something that's changed. The tutorial time, apparently they weren't in computer labs, they are now in computer labs. The tutorial content will involve some, going online and looking at things, but our tutorials actually have more students than there are computers because the computers are not that important in the tutorials in this unit. For two reasons. One is that you'll be working in group work for your assignments, so if there's group work tutorials, then you won't all need a computer each. And for other things where we're just looking at resources, then you can share a screen. And also, sometimes it's not even needing web resources. Sometimes it's just sitting around and talking. It's one of those. And yeah, people were probably groaning earlier when they saw this dot point. The exam for this unit is now closed book. It was last year as well. That is something I believe is set in stone. I can't change as much as you can try. Sorry about that. When looking at the recording for this lecture, Christopher was gloating about how happy he was that it's a closed book exam. I'm much the opposite, but there's nothing I can do about it. Tutorials then. We have 2 hours of tutorials per week starting this week. These will be somewhat following on from the lectures as best we can. This week's one doesn't really link in any particular way, so it's going ahead as scheduled. But anything that pops up in the lectures and the tutorials is examinable. So make sure that you have a look at all the things that get posted on Milo, and I'll go through the Milo site soon to give you an idea of how to do that. But basically anything that shows up on the Milo could be an exam question in some way. There's no marks for just showing up to tutorials. I don't even think it's a student engagement activity this year. The student engagement activities are different, and I'll come to them on a different slide. I've already mentioned that tutorials are not sitting down and following through a bunch of steps and working on code or something like that. There'll be a fair bit of discussion. You'll be working in groups in your tutorials. When I come to that in a moment, your groups for your assignments need to be within a tutorial. So 50% of your assessment is internal and 50% of your assessment is your exam. There's 4 assignments that are worth marks towards that 50%. The first one is an assignment 1 sketch, that's an individual one. Assignment 2 is a prototype design and development, so that's prototypes and a design document. Assignment 3 is evaluation, and assignment 4 is reflection. Before I go into a slide for each of these, I want to get a show of hands of who has done the mobile and ubiquitous computing unit with me last semester, Kit 305-607. Yeah, it's a fair few of them. Can you see some similarities between these assessments and some of the stuff that you did in mobile? That there was prototyping early on, and then there was evaluation later on. What is missing from these assignments is that you won't be making a fully functional to the spec program like we did in mobile. In mobile, we were focused in on making either an Android or iOS app. In this one, it's much broader than that. You can choose it to be an Android app or an iOS app, be a Windows app. It doesn't have to be an app, it could be anything. But we'll come to that a little bit later. As with everything on these slides and in the unit, it's all subject to change. It's becoming slightly more concrete. I'm just not yet at the stage where I'm willing to say this is set in stone. I'm pretty happy with what the assessments are, so that should be good. Hello from Launceston on the chat. Yeah, but I'm not here to try and trick or deceive you. I'll be pretty clear and transparent about any changes if they happen. And timely is probably another word that's important there that I didn't put in, that if I do want to change an assessment, give you plenty of time to adjust. But I don't think I'm going to. So our assignment 1 is a sketch, which is partly a sketch, but also a 500 to 750 word report on a potential idea. So this is an individual assignment, and you'll be basically asked to be creative here. There's a spec that's coming up on Milo soon, and so next week at the start of the lecture I will go through that spec. But it'll be up before then to give you plenty of time. It'll be relatively straightforward, but what will be important in this assignment is really assessing the target audience and context of your idea. These are things that won't make sense that much until we get onto the content, but this is coming up soon. It's due Friday, week 4, and it is a student engagement activity. So merely submitting this counts as student engagement. Even if you submit something and get 0% for it, that's student engagement because you used the Milo site. It's my understanding of UTAS's understanding of engagement. Assignment 2 is one of the larger ones that you'll be designing and developing a prototype. This is a group assignment, 3 to 4 per group, no groups of 2, no groups of 1, no groups of 5. Your group members should be from the same tutorial, and there is a group registration link which is now live. You can either do that now, or you could go and work it out in your tutorial. There's confusion? No? There'll be some peer review element to this. In this assignment, sorry guys, I can hear you talking, so unless you have something to say to me as a discussion, murmuring doesn't help. So there's 3 components to this. A fairly large design document that describes how your prototype was iterated upon. So it's not just that you're going to make a thing and you're going to explain in your design document, here's how it works. You'll be showing me a history of how it progressed from, say, a sketch on paper through to something that is, mildly functional on a computer or a app or something like that. There may be a presentation it's very much up in the air about that. Yeah, we'll see. That one is due in Friday of week 8. Any questions about this? Keep in mind there's another slide about this. Cool. So you'll be doing some prototyping on paper for this, no doubt, early on, because that's the low-cost way of doing prototyping. But in terms of how you actually produce and communicate your idea in this assignment is entirely up to you, and it'll depend on your style. I've given some examples of software that we might use, that you might use, I should say, and at some point I think we will discuss the advantages and disadvantages of these sorts of software versus paper in a lecture on prototyping. And so you could use something completely different to these. If it's something different, probably shoot me an email. If you're unsure if it's going to be acceptable, when in doubt, just email me. I'm not going to bite your head off. But you can see that it's quite broad in terms of what your prototype might actually be created in. You could use PowerPoint slides to achieve the functionality of navigation between screens if your prototype even has screens. You could use software called Balsamiq Mockups or any other ones like that. I've mentioned Balsamiq because we used it in mobile. You could do it in Photoshop and it'd be a series of images. Or if you're technically oriented, it is entirely plausible that you could make your prototype in Unity or Android Studio or Xcode. But you don't need to focus on making it actually function. It needs to be more navigation based and getting across the idea of your prototype. Not that it has, on the next slide I'll explain this, but not that it works completely. But also equally acceptable are very high quality paper sketches as well. That is possible, and we'll hopefully see some examples of that, not today, but next week. And the reason why you might go for using something like Unity over Balsamiq or Photoshop or something like that is because you might be proficient in that software. But all of your team members need to be. I've made a point of this on the assignment spec that's not out. That some of you might find it super easy to make screen transitions and layouts and stuff using Unity's UI functionality or Android Studio's interface builder and Xcode's actual interface builder, those sort of things. But it's entirely up to you what you make it in.
Lindsay,
Yes?
what kind of prototype, like an app or software, anything?
So that will depend on what your idea from assignment 1 is, and it's relatively broad. This will all have a little bit more context in a couple of slides when I say what the theme of the assignment is. So it's not that I'm saying you can prototype anything you want and then just throw it at me, because how on earth do I mark that? Already it's going to be an interesting adventure in marking, but yeah, we'll come to that in a moment. In terms of functionality for this assignment, you won't be making something that's completely feature complete. We will see examples of that, hopefully. A horizontal or vertical slice is acceptable for this assignment, and we'll explain the difference between those later on. Lots of later on going on here. I'm making lots of work for myself. But one of the main things that we're looking at here is navigation and user experience, because that's what the stuff we're going to be studying about will be. So I want to see evidence of good user experience design in your prototypes. And the design document will show how you came to the conclusion that your user experience is arguably good and how it evolved since the start of your assignment. We're not focusing on can you program proper data persistence, making it connect to a server, other devices, using actual data. You can fake a whole lot of this because it's not what's going to be assessed. Does that make sense? Once you and your team have produced a prototype, you will then conduct some evaluation. And we'll teach you how to do evaluation. Hope. And so there will be a report involved in how you would conduct evaluation. So what's your methodology? Then actually interpreting the results and discussing what you might change about your prototype. And this is due by the end of week 12. So this is closer to writing a paper about your prototype. And then finally, a smaller individual assignment that relates to what you've been doing through semester. And this is kind of an interesting assignment, I've discovered, that you will get feedback from assignment 2 and 3 in time to be able to do this assignment, but in a way you will be responding to my or the marker's feedback. However, it won't change your mark, so it's not a chance to argue your way into an HD or something like that, or argue out of a fail. But part of the discussion in this assignment will be based upon, hopefully, some detailed feedback. So either me or the markers will have to do well with some detailed feedback here. I want to do that anyway, but this would be an impossible assignment with feedback saying good or bad. That's due on Friday of week 13, so you won't have a huge amount of time to work on that. So, those 4 assignments will all come under an assignment theme, which I have pulled out of thin air, which is what happens every year in this unit. So there won't be a different theme for each assignment. We're stuck with this for semester. I'm not going to change this. I think it's pretty broad. I've copy-pasted this, and it's from the assignment spec, so this won't change. The theme is get moving at work. So we will have a look in lectures about things that will that can help people want to do more exercise and stay healthy. There are lots of different ways that we can accomplish that in HCI. To narrow that down, however, we're going to get you thinking about getting people to be active in the workplace. Right? So not just people doing exercise of the morning or after work because that's their convenient time for exercise. This is more in a workplace. The term workplace is deliberately broad here because I want you all to try out doing different assignments. I'm going to be juggling lots of teams and their ideas and guiding you through this, and so will the tutors. But, you know, some team might be talking about office workers, other teams might be talking about labourers or something like that. They're in a workplace. I'm in a workplace right now. So you will need to define the workplace and the people that you are targeting with this. So remember when I talked about assignment 1, where I said you need to think about the users and context of what your idea is related to? Those are the sort of things you need to narrow down, because it's super hard to design a user experience if you don't know your target audience. It's a fairly standard thing, and I'll probably say that in about 100 different ways through semester, but that's it. Any questions about this theme? We'll get to discuss this at many different points, but off the top of your head, any confusion with this?
So it can be hardware or software? And like, because you said gadget, or does it have to be software?
Yeah, it's primarily anything you can interact with. So what you... we can assume that maybe in your prototype that you might interface with some hardware, or you're making an interface that belongs on some hardware. So some examples we will look at that are completely unrelated are that an elevator is some hardware, but it has an interface, and someone designed the buttons on that interface and prototyped it maybe. Some people you can tell that they didn't prototype it because it wasn't well thought out. That sort of thing. And so if you were writing an assignment where you wouldn't make your elevator, clearly. We don't have the skills to make the elevator, but you could prototype the interface for it. You could have the buttons in a piece of software so you could either draw them on paper, or you could, in PowerPoint, have the buttons on a slide in PowerPoint. It's a really trivial example because think of elevators that don't have much interaction and buttons. But you know, you're not constrained to just making an app. You're free to think outside the box here. You can be safe and make an app, but thinking outside the box will also be fun here, I think. So I'm excited for that. Any other questions? Ooh, my laptop's gone off, so Launceston is effectively in the dark. Cool. There's some feedback from Launceston that when there's questions in the audience here, they can't hear you. So my bad. I will repeat the questions that have been asked. So the most recent question that was asked from a Hobart student was, can we make hardware or software prototypes effectively? And you heard my answer, which was that you're not going to be effectively making hardware, but we're caring more about the user experience on how you might interact with that hardware, or if it is just purely software, that's okay too. So the exam for this unit has traditionally tested understanding and not recall. So we will have lots and lots of content, no doubt. We're going to read some blog posts. We're going to see lots of stuff. I'm not going to ask you, what did so-and-so say about something else, and ask you to remember exactly what they said. Instead, it's likely that you'll get discussion questions that you need to answer, and the way that you answer them shows your understanding of the knowledge of this unit. So we're not here to get black and white answers, and the exam answers are all going to be completely different from all of you, no doubt, but you'll be able to answer the questions based upon your knowledge gained from this unit. It's going to be tough. I don't like those kind of exams, but we'll see how we go. There are past exams available. Who's looked at some past exams already? One? You're further ahead than me. But I will eventually be writing that exam, no doubt. Well, definitely. There will be some time in the last week of semester where we will go through that. I recommend preparing your questions about the exam in advance of that week 13 lecture. So I will go through some stuff, as I tend to do in week 13, as most people tend to do. But if you have questions about the exam, prepare them in advance, ask them of me in the lecture, and it'll be an interesting lecture. Okay, so student engagement tasks. There is a quiz that will be put on Milo by Friday of week 3. Don't be scared, there's literally one question. It'll relate to something I've said in this lecture. So in order to answer it, it's an open-ended question as well, but the only way to answer it satisfactorily is to have been here, to have been engaged with what we're discussing. So it might even be that I will make the question based upon something that someone in the audience has said, and I've decided straight away not to do that because Launceston can't hear you guys, so that would be mean. So it'll be something that we have discussed and that I've said in the discussion, no doubt. Of course, if you watch the video recording, then you'll be able to answer this question as well. That'll be up on Milo soon, sometime this week. It's really not hard, and it's nothing to do with assessment. So there's no marks for it. It's just that if you don't do it, don't attempt it, don't log on to Milo, then you haven't engaged with the unit properly. Which is a bit hypocritical to say when your lecturer doesn't even engage with the unit in week 1. Anyway, so the other student engagement task is submitting assignment 1, which is due by Friday of week 4. If I decide for some reason to push that assignment deadline, I don't know how that'll work with student engagement, but it'll work in your favour. It'll be fine. But for now, it is submission of assignment 1. I'm not just going to randomly come up with another one out of thin air. Any questions about those? There's a unit Milo. The stuff that you need will be on there. The lecture slides, the tutorial work, things that we will explore together as a class in terms of extra resources and links will be all there. It is in the progress of being updated, so over the last few days, depending on when you visited it, you might have been able to see everything, and it was 2017's content. I have restricted some of that, but will work hard to then unrestrict those as I have vetted the content. Because I don't want you looking at weeks of content that then I'm not going to deliver, because it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I will do my best to update the Milo as quickly as possible. Let's have a super quick look at that, I think. An example of how our weeks might get organised, so hopefully people can see this relatively okay. I should learn how to Milo and view as a student. This is where I realise there's nothing uploaded for you guys. Okay, lectures. So there will be no week 1 section anymore. Now there's a week 2 one. As the weeks get re-enabled, they'll come up in this list. You should take a look at all the resources that we get in here. So what we'll have is, we've got the slides that we're going through at the moment. I'm going to do some slides about HCI in general. And then after that, so I might not necessarily go through these in order, but maybe I will. We're going to look at some examples of bad interaction design in the real world. Some of you might have already seen these. We're going to look at some blog entries and stuff like that. And then the other thing that you'll see that's kind of important for most of these weeks is there's an interaction design book chapters. So we will be going through these chapters in an order that is undefined at this point. But these are your links out to the textbook chapters that we're going to be looking at. Yep, I know how to use Milo. So when you go to these links, so let me go back a step. When you go to something like the ID book chapter, there'll be some information here about that chapter of the book, but in terms of what I'll use in the lectures is the teaching materials for now. I'm not a huge fan of just taking someone else's slides and delivering them. So we will see if it'll remain like this, but you can download PowerPoint format of the slides that we use in this unit from this website. But if I choose to change them, then the link will be changed. I love it when people groan, because that was the groaning sound I did when I was like, really? This website will be your friend for a fair bit of this unit. As I said on the previous slide, that changes to the unit included trying to be closer to the textbook content. This is the textbook. There is an ebook version of this and a real book to this, but you were never told that you had to buy that book, and so I will do my best to give you questions and discussion that won't require you to go and buy a book that you weren't told you had to buy. That seems pretty fair, right? Because the unit outline didn't say go buy Interaction Design 4th edition. So why would you have gotten it? So why should I make you buy it now? So we will mostly work off the teaching materials from this site, but also some of the chapter introductions and things like that. And so your tutorial content is living in these sections. At the moment, there's just for week 2, there's just a PowerPoint presentation, which could have been a Word document that explains what you need to do in that tutorial. Try and look at your tutorial content ahead of time, but for this week it won't matter because there's no homework to be done, but I can't guarantee that for future weeks that you might have some homework to do. So interact with this Milo as best you can so you don't get caught out. Lecture recordings are on there. And that's how you get to the live stream of this. So Hobart students, you can just watch a live stream of this as well if you felt like it. Okay, back to the slides. So, that isn't the button for view slideshow. So this note says designing the exam around, assuming that you've read the book. Yeah. I will assume that you've engaged in the lectures. You'll be assessed on your understanding from lecture and tutorial content, not from a book that you weren't asked to buy. Unit content. What are we going to attempt to cover? And it's unlikely that this will be done in order. Keen eyes among you will notice that this is a screenshot from the unit outline. When it comes to human-computer interaction, we will be taking a fair bit of a look at the human component of that. So cognition, perception, embodiment and behaviour in the real world. Looking at those, behaviour is the one that I will find the most interesting, as it was part of my PhD, was how can we bring about behaviour change. And thinking about our assignment theme, where we're trying to encourage people to be healthy in the workplace. This is trying to change their behaviour, bring about some kind of behaviour change. So I suspect that behaviour in the real world will be one of the more important ones of these. Just guessing. We will be looking in human-computer interaction of human-centered design and user-centered design. We're going to look at user interfaces, both standard and non-standard, and we'll see a bit of an example of that very soon. We're going to browse ubiquitous computing and what that means for our design of interfaces. So this harks back to the mobile unit. Might have remembered we read a paper about ubiquitous computing, and that sort of led to a discussion of how do we design in all these crazy different contexts that we compute in nowadays. Probably not the right word. We'll be looking at conceptual models and interaction models and issues with usability, so things that make interfaces hard to use. We will look at how to evaluate things. That'll be a lot deeper than what mobile ever went into in terms of evaluation. And also just trends in HCI research. So what is being researched these days? And maybe you guys will find stuff that is being researched in HCI that you can tell us all about as well, because, hey, you guys have the internet. This is all at your fingertips. Oh, I was going to say something. It's my job. It'll come to me. No, I thought I had something profound to say about this. Can't have been that good. Okay, tips for success in these lectures. These weren't written by me, but it sounds a bit right that make sure you can see and hear me. So for Launceston, that's a bit hard. But on that note, I will be trying to make at least one visit to Launceston. Because I have a trip to America in week 7 and semester break, that reduces my number of chances to go to Launceston, so I'd like to say 2, but I cannot commit to that. Do some active listening, take notes. So take notes is actually fairly important because there will be a fair bit said that's not on the slides here. You might try and go back and look at all these slides before an exam, and the slides won't give you the answers you need. The notes will come from our discussions together. Revising before the next lecture. I never did that as a student, but maybe you should. And note any questions that you want to follow up with me or your tutors. Since we have the lecture on Tuesday and the tutorials on Thursday and Friday, pretty good idea to follow up with the tutors about that, even though they won't necessarily know what went on in the lecture. They're pretty smart people. I'll say it, they're smarter than me. In terms of those tutorials, there might be stuff that you need to do in advance. Participate in them, because if you don't participate and nobody participates, then there's no point showing up. If there's something that you didn't get time to do during the tutorial, because there'll be steps to go through in order that we'll have to move on from certain tasks, make notes of those to follow up on those if you didn't get enough out of the time allocated. There will be group work in the tutorials. Participate. I haven't given you guys a chance to participate yet because this was the introduction lecture of the unit. But let's move on. Any questions about the unit? So that's your description of the unit thus far. Are there any question marks in people's heads over what is going on this semester? We don't like question marks in people's heads in week 2. Cool. I'll fly through these slides that introduce the discipline, because last year they weren't even delivered. You can see I haven't changed these, week 1. So what on earth is human-computer interaction? What's HCI? So humans, that's us. Yay, this unit is about us. So that's pretty cool. Being a lecturer, I like the sound of my own voice, so I'm pretty interested in anything that is a topic about me, a human. Humans, though, could be just one single human interacting with a computer. It could be a group of humans working together, a sequence of humans working one after each other with some kind of interface. The computer and human-computer interaction refers to basically anything like a desktop, a distributed system, an embedded system, so washing machines, things like that. And the interaction is how you interact with that object. It's relatively straightforward. There's no, in my mind, no tricks to this title, except the only trick is that maybe it's a bit broader than you might originally think. So early human-computer interaction would maybe talk about one person sitting at one computer, or even earlier than that, back when we only had mainframes, which required many humans to operate, it would be many humans to one computer, one giant computer. But nowadays, it's all over the show. It's multiple humans working with multiple computers at the same time, working with other humans, things like that. So this is very broad. Oh, okay. This is a comic. This is what we had before memes. I haven't changed these slides, so I guess this is funny. Interfaces can be pretty bad. This is a good part to point out what you might be able to get out of the unit. So, who hates Milo? Who can explain why they hate Milo?
It's complex.
Complex? Yep, that's good. Any other reasons why you might hate it?
It makes people confused.
It makes people confused and it's complex. There's many... It's unstable. Yep, that's right. These are good answers, right? You're not likely to say it's complex and it's unstable and it's confusing when talking with your friends about how much you hate Milo. You might use some words that I'm not allowed to use as a lecturer. Right? So that is hopefully what we might get out of this unit, at least one thing, is that when we see an interface, Milo's an interface between you and the computer, that you'll be able to articulate in an academic way why Milo is not so great. And those were some excellent some excellent terms there, and some terms that we might even actually cover. I say might because I don't really know. But being able to look at Milo and saying that it's inconsistent. So some pages there's the interface looks like one kind of interface, and then on another page the interface, the buttons have moved to a different spot even though it's effectively trying to accomplish the same thing. Sometimes functionality is hidden. Sometimes they throw all the functionality on one page. So it's inconsistent. We'll be able to talk about design principles, and for the mobile students that will involve Don Norman's design principles at some point to say why we find certain interfaces, like Milo, not usable. So HCI, just following up on how broad this area is, it is about designing, evaluating and implementing interactive computer systems for human use. So not computer systems that interact with other computers, that's computer-to-computer interaction, and does exist. And just to scope things down, it's not computers that are designed for animal use or interaction with animals. There is a field called animal-computer interaction. That's a different unit. So it's quite broad, and because it's so broad, there's a rich area to try and to study here. We can never stop talking about this. So why would we study HCI? So that we could try and make things like Milo better. Hopefully. Hopefully. There are limitations when it comes to using computers, and there's also great capabilities. So we're always hearing about, you know, the next computing device that's super fast. We can chuck on a VR headset. We can do AR these days. These are amazing capabilities that computers have these days. There's lots of those. However, there's also many limitations in terms of these interfaces, and we'll cover some of those. And so the HCI discipline, as stated here, tries to talk about the interaction between humans and those capabilities and limitations. So we're not just talking the positives of how does a human interact with VR, but what can't they do in VR? Why can't they do those things in VR? And what's a solution to that? So let's take a step here and talk about that. For VR, what can we do? This is me asking for audience participation here. And speaking of that, I'm doing a bad job of reading the chat, but another example of Milo being bad is that it's unforgiving, says Connor from Launceston. But what can we do in VR? What does it enable us to do? It's a really broad question. There's a million answers. Sorry? Oh, right. Yeah, so the answer from the audience there was that we could make smaller devices, but maybe I didn't pose the question correctly. I didn't ask, what can we do to improve VR yet? Haven't asked that yet. Soon. What can we do when we put on a VR headset? So what are the applications of VR?
Play games.
Play games. Thank you. What else can you do with VR? Watch movies. Yeah, you can watch 3D movies and have a much more immersive experience in movies. And so did Launceston also said movie. This is fun. This is really tricky to do. Any other suggestions? There's still more. Yes, at the back. Yes, you can walk around and bump into walls. That will lead on to what I want to talk about of the limitations. But yes, there was another voice I heard. Training, absolutely. That's a big one. VR allows us to situate ourselves in situations that are otherwise dangerous or expensive to bring about, right? So we can simulate environments in VR and situate people in them, and they can put on their headset and they can feel like they're there, they can move around, right? VR is good. We can relatively agree that there's, it's got some good applications. What are some limitations? So we talked about the capabilities of VR. What's a limitation of VR?
Motion sickness.
Motion sickness, yep. The technology isn't there yet to fully represent how we might perceive the real world when I'm standing here without a headset on. In that particular way that we have motion sickness because the screen, for a couple of reasons, screen doesn't update fast enough in terms of frames per second, but also the resolution of what we can see in there. Right? What's another limitation of VR?
It's still mostly visual and auditory.
Yep, it's mostly...
Missing out on a lot of senses humans have, like smell, tactile, touch.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Sorry, I'm not ignoring all of you and just going on the internet. I'm trying to keep the chat open because it's going well there. So if people didn't hear that, it was that it's not a representation of all of our senses. VR gives us visuals and audio, but it doesn't help us with some of our other senses. What's happening on the chat is that Launceston's mentioning that the cables connected to the headset are a problem. So we're starting to move away from that now with the technology. But the fact that we are tethered still to the base machine that's running VR. They also mentioned that the room size is a problem. That's somewhat related to the fact that you're on a cable, that the cable can only go so far. But the cable has its own problems that you can choke yourself with the cable. I nearly did that once. It was a terrible time. I have a small neck. even more things from Launceston here, they're doing better than you guys, is that it's mostly a stationary or room situation that we're in, so the technology isn't really there that we want to do experiences, well, that we could be outside of a room environment. Battery life on the ones that don't have cables as well. So there's lots of different limitations there, and so HCI would look at what can we do to get around that, or what needs to be done, and what's our focus? Like, what's the worst part of VR experience out of all of those things? I can't answer that here. You guys could suggest, but that would be your personal opinion. So HCI would study, using a certain user population that we cared about, what was the biggest limitation of a particular VR experience. So I can't just stand here and say, I think the worst part about VR is the cable that chokes me. I mean, I can say that, but in order to actually do something with that kind of feedback, we need a bit of scope. We need to know, well, what sort of users doing what sort of applications and with what hardware. And so that's a research sort of question. It's not a very good one, but it's a research. This is a research space. You'll see that in week 2 that the tutorials will look at some conference papers. We'll pose the question of what on earth is a conference, what is referencing, what is a paper. And before I move on with the slides, another random point that I wanted to mention about this unit is that HCI and studying it is somewhat of a pathway into the research space. So if you're an undergraduate or a master's student and interested in moving on, for undergraduates moving on to honours, or maybe masters moving on to PhD, HCI is a very broad area. We have a number of experts at this university who couldn't be bothered coming to this lecture and delivering it. Sounds like I'm talking about a specific one, but also there are other HCI experts that just didn't have enough time. So if some of the discussions that we have in this unit pique your interest, then think about continuing this on in a research capacity. One of the things this unit was supposed to do in the past was that the lecturer, Professor Christopher Lug, is heavily in the research space, and so the idea was to get him in front of students who would then be thinking about honours. I am like a mini version of that in that I'm still doing my PhD, but I'm very much in the research space. So if you have questions about research in general at university, then ask me or ask some of your honours students who are sitting in the audience as well. But that's just something I wanted to point out. We'll take a break soon, but we'll just fly through some slides here. This is an excellent point on this slide. If we make an interface that is usable, does that necessarily mean that it's useful? I'm seeing a shake of the head from the audience, and that's correct. So just because it functions doesn't mean that the people will enjoy using that. And so how do we quantify whether or not the system is useful? That's a question I'm posing again.
If it meets the need of the users.
Yep. So does it? That's a good one. Does it meet the user's needs? That's a good question to ask. What sort of things could we measure in terms of that? So if we're trying to evaluate, we're talking about the evaluation side of HCI now, what sort of tools could we use to evaluate whether or not a system is useful? A survey. Excellent. That is one way of doing it, and we will see, I hope, I've put an asterisk next to a lot of these because I haven't read forward, that there are different types of surveys that we can do, different focuses of those. We could do a survey that happens with you, the researcher, not in the room, and it just goes to one person. Or you could do a focus group, things like that. What's another way we could evaluate how useful a system is? Not just how usable it is. Testing. Yeah, testing in what way?
If there is a report for the user requirements or needs,
Mm-hmm.
like you can do the testing in cases,
Mm-hmm.
like one by one.
Absolutely, yeah. So from the audience there was that we could use test cases. And so this would be a set of hopefully concrete and what's the other word, mobile students? Concrete and not leading. You guys just had your exam. Come on. Concrete and not leading test tasks. So I'll be talking a fair bit about that, I think, this semester, where we test whether or not a user is able to complete some common tasks with an interface. So if there was a test task for this lecture theatre of, do I know how to, can you put some slides on the screen and the Discord chat on the other monitor? They give me that test task and I would fail it because I had to get my laptop out. I'm not sure why I have 1, 2, 3 of identical screens at the moment. It's actually pretty funny what I'm seeing here. It's not useful at all. And so I would attempt as a user to complete that task. The researcher or the developer, whatever, would watch me while I'm trying to complete that task and see that I have utterly failed at that, and they would mark that down. They might then follow up, why couldn't I work it out? And I would explain that I tried to extend my monitors and it didn't work. That's probably useful feedback from a tester, but maybe you get not as useful feedback. We will talk at length about such things, but I think it's a relatively interesting example. Here's another meme. These slides were written by someone who likes Mac OS. I'm the opposite. So why, this should say why study HCI, didn't change it. We want our interfaces to be more usable. We want them to be more useful, and if they do that, then in theory, in some cases, it'll take less time to complete the tasks that we want to do, both in the workplace, but also, ticket machines. A ticket machine that works really well with its interface will get better throughput from the people. And so you're going to have less people standing around, which might lead to less need for air conditioning. I'm making massive jumps of logic there, but the costs of taking longer to use a system and the amount of money it costs to employ people or keep people around, that's rising. The cost of computers is dropping. It's pretty easy to get our hands on a tablet, many tablets, which are computers. It's easy to have many machines. These are all very affordable. So why not make the link between the humans using those computers more efficient? So if we do that, then we're reducing our cost of labour, or trying to mitigate that cost at least. That's what this diagram's trying to say, as far as I can tell. I said I'd power through these, and it's nearly time for a break, so it's nearly break time. Let's have a bit of a look. Yeah, so this is something I've said before. There's no black and white answers in this unit, which is not everyone's cup of tea. That a lot of people here would prefer to have a flat-out correct answer, and as a marker, I would love that too. But basically, there's shades of grey here. So if you're just trying to memorise answers for a good exam result, then you're in the wrong place. I didn't write that last point. There is a slide for each of these, but let's just quickly have a bit of a browse. HCI is cross-disciplinary, is what this diagram basically says. There's no real point in doing HCI by itself. There has to be some kind of context. And what this really means is that it reaches everywhere. When we talk about ubiquitous computing, it's not surprising that there's a lot of fields on here and that there are many more. What's one field that people think is missing from this slide?
Gaming.
Yes! Thank you.
known as entertainment?
Entertainment? Yeah, yep.
That's more of a field.
Sure. Yep, entertainment as a field is fine. I'm mostly being a little bit facetious that gaming isn't on here because it's under computer science apparently, but yes, entertainment in terms of HCI is interesting too. So when we look at computer science, our capabilities, we talked about this, we have improving user interfaces in terms of our degrees of freedom, the things we can do. We've got VR, we've got ambient intelligence, whatever that is. So making the most of these capabilities. But also the interaction between a programmer and the computer. The concept of object-oriented programming, according to this slide, came out of the HCI kind of study. That we needed a way of abstracting away data. So the idea of object-oriented programming came about from people thinking in a certain way of how people interact with computers. Our development methodologies, such as user-centered design, came out of HCI. Trying to understand human behaviour, their processes, so what they think about when they're using our systems, the way that they might learn, not just in terms of, when this says learning styles, this isn't saying how to make apps for learning. It means how do people learn how to use your interface in any area. So if an interface is learnable, that's one of the design principles, then that's a good quality of an interface. How do we perceive things? How long can we keep our attention? I can tell you for a fact that people are scratching their heads at 2:10. Things like that. Some areas. Anthropology is an interesting one because one of our ways of evaluating people using our systems is to try and look at them using it in the field. So mobile students who just had an exam about field research versus lab-based research, you'll get much more realistic results in the field, but they might be skewed in some way based upon real-world factors. So we'll talk about that. Break time. Let's take 10 minutes. Yeah, let's take 10 minutes. So we've been going for a while. So we'll be back at 2:18. Yeah, so the next one will still be here. It's nice and full now, so yeah, we'll stay in this one.
Yeah, I actually read it off this now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Who set their nickname to Lindsay Wells? For goodness sake. It's almost like I don't care though. It's a good thing that I've got a red name so that people know that it's me. You're not going to be able to change the colour.
I can just ask Adam to change it.
Adam won't do that. Yes.
Not even for $100.
He does like money. Fair enough. It's a terrible picture. Hey, how's it going? Yep. Yeah, I got it cut by, there's a guy, what's his name, near Woolworths. Chinese guy. Yeah, Bobby, no, Benny's haircut. Yeah. Yes. I don't have much advice about that. I mean, I'm going through the temporary residency with my wife at the moment, but you know, we currently don't have any plans to break up and get any refunds. But yeah, I'm not sure about any of that.
What's fun to do now is
Yeah. Right. I don't know if that'll work. It could. It's an interesting idea. Yeah, I'm not sure. And I honestly don't even have an idea of who you could talk to. But yeah. So we have Adam and Meredith. They're really good though. Meredith, like I said, Meredith helped write the unit, and Adam's really smart. So yeah. Yep. Doing my best with this. See how it goes. No worries. Yeah, it's already a GIF in there. It's fine. It's fine. It's the shuffling of papers. It ruins every lecture recording.
If there's ever a question, do you just point at me so you don't know?
Yeah, you can try. Yeah, yep.
Because there's been like 3 things that
No, I've missed them. Yep, it'll happen. Yeah, that'd be great. Who's Tim? Right, so I'm on another chat just then. I like that we've got people who know how to use Discord in there, so that'll be fun. Ding ding. This one isn't doing the recording. All right. Yeah. God damn it. I was going to say what would get me to walk over there, but at least one. Okay. Okay, everybody. Break time's over. Cool, let's get started. I have jumped out of the slides because we got to the end of those slides, and I am taking a look at some of the content that we've got on Milo. So this week's ones, these were procured by Professor Lug. However, some of them might be procured by me throughout the semester. Sorry guys, can still hear you? Even if it's in a different language, doesn't mean we can't hear you. So, who can tell me what's wrong with this image? Yeah, next. Who can tell me why this interface for an elevator is not particularly great? The layout? Yeah, so what we can see... This is a 1, this is a 2, this is a 3, this is a 4. I really was going to take a picture of this myself because, like, seriously. Why is this layout not particularly intuitive?
Doesn't match the building.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, so who has watched the lecture recordings from 2017? No? Okay, I was thinking maybe someone watched 2017 and just got all the answers or something. Like, it was a rapid fire answer, I'm really impressed. So yeah, that's right. It doesn't really match the layout of the building whatsoever. The building clearly, level 1 is beneath level 2 and level 3 is above level 2. This is in a pretty ridiculous order. Even if we went by left to right standards, which is, you know, a standard that we accept in many locales, you might expect 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. But yeah, it's not a great layout. And so now that I've seen this picture, I double think every time I go into the elevator. This is the elevator in the Centenary building, for reference. So right here at home, in Hobart, sorry, we have this instance of not amazing interface design. Are people comfortable with the fact that this counts as human-computer interaction? The human is pressing the buttons on this interface, which is effectively controlling a computer. It's a stretch, I guess, but it is certainly human-computer interaction. So it's the hardware example that was mentioned before. Let's see. Oh God, I don't know how to use Milo. Same elevator, different panel. Here, you basically said everything that we wanted to say here, that it didn't match the layout. This one is better, right? It matches the way that the floors are laid out in the building, 1, 2, 3, 4, on top of each other. So we can think about how high up the building we want to go. If we know we're going for the top floor, we don't have to think about it. We're tapping on the top one. If we want to get out of the building fast, we know that we want to get to the bottom one usually, so we'll press 1. On that other layout, if you're in a hurry, you'd lose a few seconds, or according to the lecture recording in 2017, you lose 5 minutes trying to work out how to use it. I don't understand. Anyway, what this refers to though, in terms of design principles, who from mobile can think what this might be? So the mobile unit. I'm going to do that a little bit and maybe stop doing that as semester goes on, but from Kit 305, 607, which of Don Norman's principles do you think this is? Didn't teach you anything. This is a mapping. So we're mapping our buttons to functions that our elevator can perform, and if we can map them in a way that makes logical sense, then we will have a more usable interface. Note that I didn't say it is suddenly really usable and really great, because there's no black and white answers to this, that suddenly we have a magic pill that fixes everything. But these buttons map to the way the building is laid out. So when we go to interact with it as a human, it makes sense. Being a little bit over the top with my emphasis on the words here, but you can try and make a connection between this image and the unit, because you might not be up to that point where you can make that connection. Okay? We will cover such things as mapping and other things, I assume. Let's take a little bit of a look at this blog entry. Hope it loads. So, I don't know who this person is. They might be important, might not be. It's an interesting little note to say, I hate the word user. So, we hear the word user a fair bit in technology, sure, but the other area is drugs, drug users. So, we talk about user-generated content a fair bit. We talk about user interfaces, user experiences, things like that. This person's opinion is that the word user has some negative connotations. Why do you guys think that the word user is not an amazing word to use for the people that we are testing on and designing for? So, waiting on Launceston? No. So it's not very personalised. So think about when you might be shopping for a car. Does the car dealer call you a potential car user? Nope. When you're shopping for a house, are you a house user? No. What do people in those situations usually refer to you as? Customer? Any other terms? Clients, yeah, things like that. So depending on the context, when we're talking about people involved in it, so stakeholders, if we can try and provide more robust definitions of who they are, then we can get a bit more of a feel of how we're designing around them. Let me provide another example about this, using our theme from semester that I was talking about, exercise in the workplace. So yes, I will use the word user a hell of a lot this semester because it's just easier. But what's another term for the people we might be making these apps for, or these interfaces for? Demographic. That's more of a broad term to say how we might describe anyone. When I talk about someone in a workplace, what are they? What could they be? Employees, yeah? Workers? And depending on what your particular context is, it might be labourer, it might be office worker, things like that. We get a little bit more of a picture of who we're designing for, which is ridiculously important when we start talking about user-centered design. If we just depersonalize it and start talking about them as this sort of user, this person who is passive in the interface, then we lose a lot. Yep, that's all I've got to say about that. Unless anyone has anything else they might have read further than the first few sentences than I just read out loud. Any comments about this blog post? Nope, all right, try and save some time. Not wait too long. From Launceston, I'm getting really bad at this. They said all the good answers like client and end user is one term, but you know that's still pretty broad and doesn't give us much information. We're going to have a look at another blog post now. So this is an interesting post by someone who worked as a user experience designer at Hcil2. People have heard of that company or that website for helping people find jobs. This blog post, which I'll leave you to peruse in your own time, but it sort of highlights the impact of what might be somewhat of a small change in an interface. So this person is talking about how they added a feature to their maybe a registration page or something that talked about gender selection. And they added the term non-specific. And so this had an impact, which we'll talk about in a second, which was that, well, I won't talk about the impact yet, I'll talk about it in a second, is that they could have said not specified. So you might see not specified in a gender drop-down box on forms. What that really refers to is I'm not telling you, whereas non-specific is effectively our catch-all for people who don't identify as male or female. This is actually in line with anti-discrimination laws in Australia. I didn't know this, but you could get sued effectively if your registration form is non-inclusive. Here's another interesting fact about this is that on our passports, usually have M for male, F for female. You can actually have X for an indeterminate, unspecific, or intersex. Note that that isn't non-specified, it's unspecific, because you have to say something on your passport, you can't just say nothing. And the impact of not being included in various ways has a pretty nasty impact on people who don't identify as male or female. And what this blog post talks about is that after including this on their form, they got some feedback that people enjoyed this. This had a positive impact on possibly 700,000 other individuals using this form. Not that many, because not everyone uses Seek, but it had a positive impact on these people. And this person, who is a highly accomplished UX designer, found this the highlight of their career, which is quite powerful words. And we're all only talking about adding something to a drop-down box. So our choices, however maybe to you might seem insignificant, can have quite an impact. Another thing that is interesting to talk about is non-intentional design. So, why is it hard? Sorry, trying to pose an interesting question for you. Can we design a user experience? Yes or no, audience? I would say, in general, we can try. So that was mean. I asked for a yes or no. And the answer's, we can try. So, an example, and I'm stealing this directly from Professor Lug, because even though it's a bit ridiculous, I think it's fun. I'll explain what I'm doing to the stream in a moment. We have a chair. Someone designed this chair. And then what we have with non-intentional design is this. I can draw on the top of the board now. So for the stream, I stood up on top of the chair and I was able to reach something. Do you think the designers of the chair, whoever they may be, and this is sort of an abstract question, thought about this possibility? Is it yes or no? No? Yes. Some people thought yes. You could be right. I don't know who designed the chair. But what it is that someone designed this chair for sitting. So the user experience with this artifact, that's a swanky term for thing. When they designed that, it was designed for a user experience of sitting in the chair. However, people will always find a way to circumvent things or find other uses for them. So me deciding to stand on the chair to be able to reach something higher is non-intentional design. Sorry, distracted because poor Launceston has been disconnected. They might have to try and reconnect. Anyway, so more solid examples of non-intentional design. So we can design a chair for sitting, but we can't design it to stop me from going and standing on it, is the point. And so this is kind of an interesting flicker, I guess, of people using things in ways they weren't originally intended for. It's such a good idea, right? Yeah, so you get the idea. However, I wanted to bring a slightly more game-related example of this, which is the Green Demon Challenge. Who's heard of this before I open it up? So what this is Mario. People have added text to but we don't have time. We've got 15 minutes. Okay, we'll give this book chapter a bit of a start, which is about on line with what happened last year. So we'll start at chapter 1, but as I said, there is no guarantee that we will be doing them in order. So just keep an eye on Milo. Wow, that's slow. Hi Launceston, great to hear you are back.
When we do our next YouTube video, apparently they got the full volume of the video.
We got no sound. Sorry Launceston. Noted, absolutely noted. Wow.
The live stream's still coming up for Launceston. They just got their program.
Yep. So we won't get very far into this presentation, but we'll do our best. So this book, Interaction Design, was originally called Human-Computer Interaction, probably where the name of the unit came from. It's shifted in focus towards interaction design. I talked a little bit about, in that introduction to HCI lecture, about how humans could be a single human, group of humans, or a sequence of humans, or anything in between, working with one or more computers in some way. The term human-computer interaction is somewhat, maybe a little bit dated, because it could be interpreted as one human, one computer. Whereas if we just sort of broaden our scope a little bit more to interaction design, we're not even just talking about computers. To the layman, a computer is still just this thing in front of me. Some people wouldn't even call the laptop a computer. Hopefully now you guys understand that when I talk about a computer, I could be talking about computers, I could talk about laptops, phones, smartwatches, things like that. Anything that that has a computer inside it. Your car, your washing machine, anything like that. So that's why they've sort of shifted the emphasis, I guess, a little bit. So now another example of bad designs. I wonder where Christopher got his elevator idea from. Snap! I will try not to do that. So let's see. The example on the bottom, if I stepped into an elevator like this, I'd be pretty confused. It's not clear at all what is a button, what isn't. You could press any one of these things and think it's a button. Other things are labels. So this breaks a lot of conventions. And again, with using Milo as the example I did before, what we will hopefully learn as one of the skills from this unit is we could look at this interface and instead of just saying it's not amazing, we could say that, for example, it lacks consistency. Why are some things blue, other things not? I can maybe see why, because the door-related things are blue. They're not in any kind of logical order. And the mapping is way off as well. We've no idea what really does what. Does a button do something? What's a label? What's not? Whereas the top one is a lot better. However, it still looks a little bit like buttons here. There's extra stuff here on this image of what's this about? You know, is this a button? Is this something that I can use? Things like that. It's not overly complicated, but to some people, it could be. So depending on who you're designing for, you need to design towards those people. So here's another example. Why is this vending machine so bad? We need, apparently, to push the button first before we can do anything at all. Normally, when we're using a vending machine, we put our money in first and then select things, right? So at the very first hurdle of using this machine, it's contravened our known convention of using vending machines. And not for any reason that makes this easier to use. Maybe the designers thought that they were making this forgiving, to use another word from mobile, that you can't accidentally put your money in this and then lose it. Maybe, but more forgiving is that there would be a give me back my cash button. Rather than adding an entire extra step. The order of these, I've got to read where they are. It's not particularly great, right? But the main thing is the sequence here of actions, and it's not what we're used to. I don't have a clock in front of me because I have 3 full screens, so if it gets really late, someone just tell me to shut up, and I won't mind. This is an example of good design, and it's a relatively well-known one in the field. Has anyone heard of this marble answering machine before? No? That's because you're new to the field, so fair enough. What this answering machine does, it's not actually a functioning one, right? So it's a prototype, and it would have been made out of probably wood or cardboard, but you could probably use real marbles in here. And so when you get a message on your answering machine, I assume I don't have to explain what an answering machine is, and I won't just for time. Whenever you get a message, that would be represented by one marble here. And so in this image we have, well, 4 messages, and then to play a message we can pick it up and place it on some kind of reader, and doing so starts playing the message. It's kind of cool. Maybe not overly practical, but it's kind of cool. It provides a different interface to what we're used to with answering machines. When we think about our normal everyday answering machines, if you've got one, I don't have one, so this is a bit of a stretch for me, but usually there's just a single number on the interface saying how many stored messages, and normally you'd be able to look at that number when you've come home to see that, but it's not immediately clear whether or not that number is high or low just by looking at it, especially when we think about little LED-based numbers. We have to take a second to perceive what's the number. Is it huge? Is it low? Do I have 0? Do I have 8? Whereas in this, the number of marbles takes up physical space, and we can see how many messages we've got. I suppose in theory, if you had too many messages, the fact that there's marbles on the floor might also help tell that you've got far too many messages. You should read them. Being able to select which one to read, you don't have to select the one at the end. You don't have to use up and down buttons to work out which of the 5 scheduled messages to go through. You simply go, I want to read that one. I'm going to pick that and put it in the reader. So it's pretty cool. And there's a little bit of fun to it. I suspect that would dissipate over time. So it would be, what's the word that I'm looking for? Fun for the start and then boring forever after. My lecturing, no doubt. No, I really can't think of the word. It's escaped me. But it'll be fun at first, but maybe not always. A gimmick. Thanks, Launceston. It's working really well. I'm actually kind of just happy and surprised because I don't really do much Launceston stuff. First semester doing it, actually. So, yeah, it only requires 1-step actions to do the core tasks that you might want to do on this. This will be the last slide we'll look at today, so no stress. If you were asked to prototype this, what would you do? So if I set an assignment to say, prototype this particular one, what sort of things would you do? Huh? Would you first work on the marble detection code? Probably not. You would probably make the shape of this, that there's, just the physical shape of it, that it's probably made out of wood and that it's got a little channel for the marbles to go through. You might spend a little bit of time on that because that should be, depending on how you do it, low cost. You might even just draw a sketch of this. It's even lower cost. But say you didn't even bother to make that marble detection code that's able to play a sound through a speaker and you have to make all the embedded system for this. Say you had just a prototype that looks a bit like this. How would you evaluate it? So when I talk about evaluating, I mean you've made this cool thing, all right, just in this example, made this cool thing, and you want to test it on someone that hates their current answering machine. How would you get them to test this out? What sort of steps would you go through? No?
You could do usability
You could, that's right. How would you operationalize them? So using the example of a usability test task that you might not know what that is yet, but if I had the task of, gave the person the task of read the most recent message. That's a task you'd do on this interface. But your prototype doesn't have speakers. How would you test this with people? The answer is that you can do it. So it's not like I'm saying you can't. I got a bit bogan then, sorry. I am originally from Rosetta, which probably only means something to a few of you, but yeah, anyway, that came out. So how would you test this?
See which marble they pick up.
Yep, see which marble they picked up. How would the user know that they've successfully read their message? Well, like if they've picked up that last marble and put it in, what would you do as a tester?
Read out a message?
Absolutely, yes. You can read out the message or a fake message to the user yourself. You don't need a speaker hidden inside the box that's linked up to some kind of weight, pressure sensitive thing that detects weights of different marbles to work out which marble had been placed there with a fancy system. You're a human, you have a voice box, mostly, and you can stand there and react to how your user is interacting with the prototype. And what does that cost? Yes. Fine. $1 then. It costs not much, right? It costs you nothing to stand there. It costs however long, whatever your time is worth. And, you know, mine's worth about this much and I'm waiting for the clock to... So it doesn't cost you much to do that kind of testing. Any other points about this? Why would we want to do this testing with, you know, just saying it out loud without spending any money to test this? Why would we do it that way? Why wouldn't we just go ahead and make the mechanism for detecting the marbles?
To see how well it works before you invest any reasonable amount of time and effort into it.
Absolutely. So from the audience, that was that we would see how well it works before investing our time and money into developing the marble mechanism for this. The messages from Launceston, what do they say? They would, to dispose of a message, so this is a question about this interface, how would you dispose of a message in this one? What's an interesting way we could do that? You literally pick the marble up and throw it out. Throw it in the bin. Where do you think dragging to the recycle bin came from? Possibly also in this prototype, there's a little hole at the top there. I don't know if you could actually dispose of them to put them in there. It's hard to say. Another thing that this interface could bring about is the colours of the marble. And I'm not suggesting that we use red and green like this, but you could colour code these marbles based upon who the message was from. So if you got home and you had 5 red marbles and you knew that your wife was the red marble, you'd probably walk back out the door and go, oh no, not reading that. Whereas if you had some unknowns that were maybe white, you would go, oh, what's that about? Why am I getting some calls here? Who's that? If you had 5 red marbles and in between was that one white marble from the unknown and you knew the red ones were from your wife, you'd pick up the white one, listen to that and ignore the ones from your wife. These are things that you can easily do with this interface that, in general, our limited answering machines can't do. There's a question at the back.
How would you identify if it's like a scam or a prank call?
Well, if you had a system that could do that, then that marble could go into a different channel or something like that. You know, this system is open to being modified to handle spam. Because we do have spam detectors. I know that if I get calls from something that's spam, Samsung can detect that. That kind of system inbuilt into this could work. And you could design around that. It's 2:50, so any questions? That was fun. We will get into some proper slide content next week. I'll try and catch up as well. Thank you for listening and thank you so much for bearing with us in these troubling times. And thanks Launceston. Thanks guys, that was great. if you're happy to be, then you know if you continue to go to the lectures, because you did pretty well in mobile. So yeah, you came to most of them. You know, I remember because I was talking each week. Yes. So yeah, happy for that. I didn't use you too much there in terms of you pointing at me.
Stuff people saying anyway, so I was like,
Yeah, I'll get used to that and I'll get better at this. But yeah. All right. See you next week.
I had a question regarding VR.
Yes.
Do they have systems where you sort of still see the real world, but it just sort of overlays?
Yeah, that's right. That's a point that I didn't quite get to. Unfortunately, because we're running out of time. It was part of. I meant to make that point actually, which was that yeah, we only see VR, that's the virtual environment, but it is possible to overlay the real world in front of it. And so, at a very rough perspective, that's mixed reality. So it's a combination of virtual reality with a headset, augmented reality, which takes you know, a view of the real world and superimposes virtual things on it, but isn't necessarily on a headset. Combining those two things together gives us mixed reality, but there's other, that's quite a broad term, but there is some. So one I have used, even simply, is, I programmed it myself actually, is Gear VR. You can just run an app and it's head with your phone, but then you use the camera that's attached directly to it, and then you transfer that image on it, and so that's got a one-to-one mapping with where my head is pointing. Unfortunately, there's still limitations to that. One, it's slow, so when I move my head, the world takes a fraction of a second to catch up, so it's disorienting. You don't want to be in there for more than literally 10 seconds. And it's only got one vision point, so it's only one camera. Whereas our eyes would prefer two, matched to each one of the screens, or each one of the lenses, I should say, in the VR headset. But that, I don't know a whole lot about that technology, but it is something that exists.
So do you know if they have any like games that are superimposed over an environment? Like, you know how a lot of VR games require you to walk